Good morning, folks. Since it was such a beautiful day out, I thought we'd come outside and do the filming for this video. So today I'm going to talk briefly about and then tie a version of a beadhead pheasant tail that I like to do. So this fly really came about from combining a couple different flies that I like. So when I started fly fishing, I would read Charles Meck's Pennsylvania fly fishing book and other articles that he wrote and stuff, and he would talk about the beadhead pheasant tail was a fly that he liked. So I would tie those up, and it was basically just a brass bead at the time and a pheasant tail around the hook with the tail. Very simple. He would leave the, if I remember correctly, he would leave the pheasant tail ends, tag ends out, or butt ends out as legs. Something he would do. And then there was another pheasant tail that I really liked the look of, the American pheasant tail by Al Troth, and that one combined some peacock herl in the thorax, and I always think that peacock herl adds a nice touch to just about any fly. So that's Roscoe the Wonder Dog you hear barking there. Anyway, so fast forward a little bit, and I started tying a fly called shopvac, which is basically a pheasant tail body with a little tuft of antron and a bead head. So basically what I did, not real consciously even, but I just sort of combined some of those different things. I combined the pheasant tail that all these flies shared. I added tail fibers on, which the shopvac didn't have. It didn't have a tail. I borrowed the antron tuft from the shopvac. I just think that white tuft of antron just catches fish eye. I mean, who knows what it does and why it works, what the fish think it is, but it seems to catch their eye. Threw in the peacock herl thorax the shopvac didn't have, nor the original beadhead pheasant tail from Charles Meck, and then of course went to tungsten beads instead of the brass beads that I originally used. So anyway, that's the fly, and I don't really have a great name for it, but I just call it a beadhead pheasant tail. Oh, the other thing I added was a hot spot. So I tie it with orange thread, which gives us a little hot spot. So it kind of throws in all these nice fishing materials. So just to recap the materials that we're going to use, we've got pheasant tail and peacock herl, okay, some white antron. I'm going to tie this one on a size 14 fully mill check nymph hook. You could use any, I like to tie them on check nymph or scud type hooks. You could tie them on a straight hook if you want. I usually do them in 14s, 16s, 18s, in that size range. We've got 2.8 millimeter tungsten beads in a gold color for this one. You could, just match the bead size up with whatever hook you're using so that it looks natural, or that it fits well on the hook, and some copper wire for some ribbing, just to reinforce the peacock. And of course I already talked about the fluorescent orange thread. When I'm fishing this fly, basically I'm using it as in a one fly rig whenever I can get away with it. I really like to fish one fly when I can, dead drifting it, and sometimes fish will hit on as it lifts up. So I like to finish the drift out and let the fly lift up. Mainly focusing though on that casting up ahead and drifting. And if I'm using a two fly rig, sometimes the smaller fly is what the fish want, it seems like, and but it's hard to get it down as deep as I want it. So I'll go to two flies, and when I do that, often I'll put the heavier fly as the dropper, and I'll use a muskrat nymph or a waltz worm, something like that, with a bigger bead as the dropper, and then I'll put the smaller fly as the point fly. And the point of that is just to get the whole thing deeper, when I want that smaller fly to get deeper. If I want to fish different depths of the water, then I'll put the heavier fly on as the point fly and this lighter fly on as the dropper. So I think that this fly just looks so much like if you pick up rocks and you look under there, there's a lot of nymphs that are darkish in the 14, 16, 18 size range in a lot of streams. So I just think it makes a good imitation of a lot of the mayfly nymphs that are in the streams, and I've used it everywhere I fish and had really good success on it. So it's pretty easy to tie, and so we'll get right to that next. Thanks, folks. Let's get down to tying. So like I said, at first we're going to use this Fulling Mill size 14. It's a curved check nymph style hook, and we're going to match that up with a 2.8 millimeter tungsten bead. You could go to 3 millimeter on this size hook if you wanted to, or go down to a size 16 hook. Okay, with that bead, or downsize your bead a little bit if you're going to 16 or 18, whatever fits. Sometimes the eye on a hook will get too small for the hole in the bead, so just be careful of that. All right, so the first thing we're going to do is get some of this pheasant tail. For this size fly, I'm going to use about that much. So what is that? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. 8 or 9 fibers, something like that. Using the fluorescent cobweb. This is 6/0. For size 16 or 18, you might want to go down to a smaller thread size if you have trouble with it getting too bulky. But I'm going to make the tails about the length of, it's a curved shank, but something like that, from here to the bend approximately. All right, so what I'll do is I'll work the thread back to where I want the tie-in point of the tails to be, and just give it a wrap like that. And at this point you could adjust the size a little if you want. Okay, I'm not going to over wrap that pheasant. I don't want to create a bulky lump there. Okay, so I'm just going to do that. Next we're going to put in, put in some of the copper wire for the reinforcement. This is a fairly fine, there's Roscoe again. This is a fairly fine wire. You could use the size up like a brassy or even a medium if you want to add a little more weight with the wire. Don't worry about it too much. All right, so you want to create a smooth underbody. So I don't worry about the tapering it with the thread so much, because the pheasant tail will often, as you go from the finer tip ends to this end, it'll kind of taper on its own. So at this point I like to use some hackle pliers. I really like these clip style hackle pliers. This helps keep all those fibers together so I don't drop some of them as I wrap. All right, now let's, you could counter wrap this copper wire if you like. Some folks think that helps with the reinforcing. I'll do that. That way it's wrapping in the opposite direction that you wrap the pheasant tail. All right, now we can trim off these butt ends. At this point, I like to throw in a whip finish. Just hold that tight. Probably don't need to do that, but I'm in the habit of it. All right, so next thing, you're going to, this is where I like to put in the antron tuft. All right, so I'm going to use the full piece of yarn. If you're tying much smaller ones, you might want to split out some of the fibers if it looks too bulky. Okay. I like to trim that off about half the body length, something like that. So it's just a little tuft. All right. Next up is the peacock. You could often just get away with one herl if you want, or you could do two on this size. Let's do two. To reinforce the peacock, once I wrap it, I'm gonna wrap the thread back towards the tie-in point of the peacock, and then we'll wrap that through the peacock. All right, I'm gonna just wrap this quite a bit on here, just until I start to see some build up, so that you can see an orange collar for a hot spot. And we'll do whip finish. Often, if I'm tying just for myself, I'll skip the head cement, because I often lose so many flies. Durability isn't often an issue, but if I'm going to use head cement, I'll put it on the thread like that before I do a whip finish, so it gets in and worked into the threads there. Okay, so there you have it. That's a bead head pheasant tail. I don't have a fancy name for it, but got a hot spot and an antron tuft, peacock thorax, and that's all there is to it. Thank you.